Alright, hello, this is Last Epoch, or Epoch, both of those are technically correct ways to pronounce this. So this is an ARPG in the vein of other games, of course, like Diablo, Torchlight, Path of Exile, etc., etc., Titan Quest, Grim Dawn. I think that's all the ones I can think of right now. Basically, this is a genre that I like probably way too much, and so whenever a game that is either, updated from a long time ago, like what happened to Titan Quest, or is just a new game that's coming along in the genre, I basically have to take a look at it. It's sort of part of my religion at this point. So this is Last Epoch. It is in early access right now. We'll talk more about what it has versus what it has yet to get, and things like that a little bit later. But for right now, I think probably one of the main things to speak about on it is this is becoming kind of a saturated market right now. Not to the point where there are like hundreds of them or anything, but these games take a lot of time from the people that are actually playing them, which means there are only a certain number of games in this genre that people would be willing to play at any given time. So that means that with a lot of really good ones on the market right now, like Path of Exile, Grim Dawn, and the updated Titan Quest, a new game has to differentiate itself somehow. It has to do something different to actually make itself stand out and make people want to play it, or at least try it out. And in the case of Last Epoch, it actually does a couple of really, really genuinely interesting things to do that. The first of which is the time system mechanic idea. Basically, there are several different eras that you will actually travel through, eras in time, and these will alter the world around you, because each era is actually quite significantly apart time-wise from the other three, and each one has its own enemy groups and just its own general happenings. And this is really, really cool because you're in obviously the same world the whole time, and you'll often be going through the same areas multiple times, but in different eras, which changes the entire thing. You go all the way from the ancient era, which is actually where your character is from, past that to a more advanced time, like say the Imperial era, where the surface of the planet, I guess, is sort of ruled by this undead empire. And there are these horrible machines and bones everywhere that are being used to like extract souls from living people and power the empire with them. So it's a very different place at that point. And then even past that, there is the mysterious void in the ruined era, the sort of purple amalgam of weirdness that is taking over the surface and forcing humanity underground, or what's left of humanity underground, into like mushroom farms and the like in caves to survive. So yeah, things change a lot. The types of enemies you're facing, the types of objectives that you'll be actually going after, and all that vary significantly depending on the area that you're actually in, the era that you're in, rather. And each of these has their own sort of sets of challenges, and even different sets of NPCs with different side quests and things. And in fact, sometimes you actually, in order to complete things, especially side quests, of course, have to transition between eras in the same places to actually find yourself a way to complete the mission. For instance, there will be one where you have to explore a certain area and you're given a key to the door that leads to it, but in the era that you're in, when you're asked to explore it, they won't let you in. So, naturally, you go much later into time when you can still get to that place, but there's no longer anyone there, and you can use the same key to unlock the same door and actually explore the place then. But you have to figure this out on your own, which I find very, very cool, or I guess you would until I told you. But anyway, I think it's a really neat idea, because if you're going to do this whole time travel thing, then I think making use of it as often as possible and making it, weaving it into the side quests in the way that you have to actually experience and go through the game in as many ways as they can makes a lot of sense. The other way that this game has actually differentiated itself is the class and skill system, in the way that this game has a lot of variety. Basically, it uses variety as sort of a selling point. However, oftentimes, especially in games like this, variety can come as a replacement for depth, and that is not the case here. In fact, the variety and the depth are actually very connected all the way through. So, the way the character system works is you have 5 classes to choose from that are 5 different characters. And they are the sort of usual archetypes that you would expect, although with quite a large variety of skills. However, there are also 3 subclasses for each and every one of those classes, so there are technically a lot more than just 5. And the subclasses actually really involve just mostly, almost like a prestige class, I think would be the best way to think of it. They involve taking bits of the base class and actually specializing in that thing in particular. For instance, I'm playing the Acolyte in the background, who is a sort of necromancy class, and their 3 classes to specialize in are the Necromancer, which focuses very much on your actual minions and the like. The Warlock, which is currently not in the game, so I don't know exactly what that will do gameplay-wise. I'm guessing maybe some elemental magics mixed in there and things like that, sort of like a nuker. And the Lich, which is the one I'm going for, that involves a lot of sort of death magic and kind of like almost like a spell blade, only instead of the normal way that a spell blade would work, it is blade and necromancy rather than blade and elemental magic. It's very enjoyable. And you have a skill tree for every one of the actual main classes and, of course, the 3 subclasses. And once you get 20 points in your main skill tree, it will unlock all of the subclasses. And although they are specialized, you can technically put passive points into all of them that you want to. You're not actually restricted from doing that at any given time. Whoops. Or knocking stuff off of your desk. And the actual specialization aspect comes in when you have to choose if you actually want to continue to do that, to just put a bunch of individual points throughout all of the trees to sort of make your build, or to actually become one of those subclasses entirely and unlock the rest of it, because every subclass actually has basically like a whole third of their passive tree, maybe even half, that is actually locked off, and you can't normally get to it until you put about I think it's 25. You put a certain number of points into that, and that will allow you to actually unlock the rest of it, which has very powerful stuff. But when you do that, you lock yourself out of the other 2 subclasses in the process, so you have to be careful of which one you choose. I think this is a really cool system because it involves a way to experience a lot of different builds for your character without committing yourself to one immediately and not knowing if that's actually the one that you want or not, if that makes sense. And, there's a problem sometimes in genres like this where you're forced to select a class right from the beginning, and you don't actually know if you're going to enjoy that class or not, but once you choose it, that's it. In this case, you at least get a lot of variety in said class and a lot of opportunities to actually, maybe or maybe not go for certain types of builds before you actually choose to fully commit to one. But where this gets really, really interesting are the skills themselves. So there are 2 ways that you actually acquire skills in this game as of right now, one of which is simply through leveling up as your class. At certain points, you will get a new skill, and it's really just as simple as that. And you can then use the skill in your skill bar from that point on. The second way is, you probably have seen in the background some of the skills, the skill symbols, the big sort of squares, at the right side of the passive tree for your character. And as you unlock the various tiers of passives, as you put more and more points into those trees, they will build up to the point where you'll both be able to access the next tier of passives above the one that you're currently putting points into, and any skills to the right that will also unlock at that point. So this is another way that the whole specializing in one of those subclasses works, because there will always be one skill, at least, that is far up in the sort of tier system to the point where you have to actually specialize in that class if you want to be able to use it. Therefore making at least one skill in each subclass exclusive to it, and you have to actually specialize in it to get it. For instance, on the Lich, that skill is Reaper form, which allows you to transform into sort of like a temporarily undying Reaper with special skills that is very, very strong, builds up a lot of power, but has constantly decaying health. And as far as I know, can't really be healed that easily, but when you die in it, instead of actually dying, you just go back to your normal human form. And that sounds awesome. It actually reminds me a bit of the Necromancer Ultimate from Guild Wars 2. We'll see how that works. I'm not quite there yet. But anyway, so that's the way actually obtaining skills works. And here is, in my opinion at least, the most interesting and exciting part of the game. Every single one of those active skills that you can actually slot in and use has their own skill tree inside of itself. So all of those actually have a skill tree simply within themselves that you can actually specialize in and access. This allows you to change the skill vastly from how its normal, I guess, kind of vanilla form actually is. So, for instance, the first one I actually chose, being a necromancer, basically was summon skeletons, because I figured it was going to be one of my early game bread and butter skills, and it turns out to very much have been a worthwhile thing to do this. And when you first start out with summon skeletons, you can use it to, well, summon skeletons, you probably figured that part out, but it also has certain limitations and certain specific aspects to it, like you can summon 3 skeletons at first, maximum, and some of them will be warriors, and some of them will be mages, and that's how it'll work. But when going through, if you choose to specialize in that particular skill, you will unlock its skill tree, and when going through it, you see other options, like, for instance, the ability to summon a lot more than that, but have some sort of negative gesh to them. For instance, Brittle Legion, I think it's called, allows you to summon an extra skeleton for every point you put into it, but they will all take a certain percentage more damage as well. So I can actually summon 5 skeletons now instead of 3. And you will also find other somewhat less minor changes to it, like, for instance, the ability to add skeleton archers to the mix. And even the ability to augment currently present things, like give skeleton archers a poison arrow, or give skeleton mages this big necrotic sort of mortar thing that's like an AoE that does necrotic damage for you. And then you can even have major changes to it, like, for instance, completely disable the ability for skeleton mages to be summoned at all if you just want archers and warriors for some reason, because you've sort of delved very heavily into that side of the skill tree, so you don't want mages to actually sort of pollute the skeleton pool, if that makes sense. And other things like changing it to where only one skeleton warrior at a time can be summoned, but all of the other skellies have a 30% flat increase to their crit chance, which is huge. So yeah, you can vastly change the way that any of these skills actually works, and this is, in my opinion, the most interesting part of the game. I love this. It's really, really cool. I was actually kind of... I didn't expect this to be in it. I hadn't seen anything that implied that this sort of skill specialization was part of the game yet, and I was sort of blown away for the first time I actually clicked on a skill and it popped up this huge skill tree for me to see all the various things I could do to it, and then that clicked in my mind saying, oh, all of them have this, don't they? And they do, although currently not actually all skills, I must admit, have this skill tree, and that's not because they're not going to, which is because it's in early access and not all of them are done yet. But more on that, again, like I said, in a few. So yeah, eventually every single one of your skills is going to be available to actually alter in this way, and the alterations range from pretty minor to absolutely massive, like changing the entire damage type of a skill that makes it an entirely separate skill at that point, basically. And yeah, every class can do this, and it's super awesome. I also like that they have made even the simpler changes that you can do in this system more exciting than just, you know, like 1% damage, 3% crit chance. Like, there's more to it than that, and I really enjoy that they have decided to go that route and really make these skills hugely customizable. There is also a crafting system that involves getting shards that represent different affixes and suffixes and their effects, and actually putting them on equipment to customize it directly, this is sort of like a more direct, less random system of something like Path of Exile's version of crafting stuff, and I love that system personally, and this system is recognizable, at least to people that may have tried something like that. So basically how it works is both from just, you know, killing things and opening chests and getting loot, and also from using these things called runes of shattering to break apart equipment that you don't want. You will find shards that have a specific use, and it is like the affix and suffix system that the shards actually carry the specific names of. So it'll be like, you know, added shock damage, minion health regeneration, you know, everything that can be put on an item. You then have this sort of separate pane of crafting materials that you can, luckily at any time, so they don't have to clutter up your inventory, actually place these materials into. And then you can simply drag any one of your pieces of equipment up into this window, and actually it will highlight all of the possible shards that you have that actually fit on that item. And items can have 2 prefixes and 2 suffixes on like the sort of lower rarities, and this all of course changes as you go through. And you can then just use these shards to craft whatever you want onto the item. And for every shard you put on it, there is a stat called instability that will increase each time, making like subsequent uses of the system more likely to fail, and you can actually damage your gear this way and make it unable to be modified further and other things like that. And there are other crafting materials that will do things like reducing the total instability that the next craft will add, or making a craft a lot more likely to succeed, etc., etc. It's that sort of system, and it's pretty fun to use. And I also like how each material actually has multiple tiers, and you can craft, again, with the exact same material onto an item and actually up the tier of that effect to up its strength in comparison. It's a neat system. Now, in terms of its early access status and what it's missing, what it has, etc., etc., first I should mention that the game is currently $35, which I understand is a fairly expensive prospect But the reason for that is they're not only, of course, using it to fund the rest of the development, but because you're also getting some cosmetic things and all that sort of stuff once the game launches and all that. And in general, they just want to have a large number of people that are actually going to help them hammer down bugs and test their servers, etc., etc. And the game is actually going to be cheaper than that when it comes out, which I think is pretty reasonable, personally. So look for that. The classes and the subclasses are one of the main sort of features of the game that's not done yet. There's 4 out of the 5 main classes, and not all of the subclasses are actually in yet. Most of them are, but not all of them. For instance, as an Acolyte, the Warlock class is not in yet. However, I think it's also probably fair to say that it's possible some of the balance of the classes is also going to change, and how some of the passives work and all that is, of course, very much subject to change in a beta. There are also other game modes and things like that, like, say, the Monolith, which is sort of like running maps in Path of Exile, that is in currently, but some other stuff like PvP that is not in. So it's mixed in terms of how much is available. I will say that there's quite a lot of content here. The story is already quite long and there's a lot to do, but it is obviously not finished yet. It is a little bit buggy occasionally. I haven't had any crashes or anything personally, although I've heard that's possible. I just haven't experienced them myself. But I will say that I have had a couple of really weird instances of my AI, the AI for the skeletons, just any sort of like pet or minion AI, sort of bugging out a little bit and deciding not to do anything. And also, there was a moment one time that I actually loaded out from an interior, like, dungeon out back into, like, a sort of open area, and sort of, like, loaded under the map for a second. But it corrected itself, and it didn't actually do anything wrong, but it was clearly not supposed to happen. I've also noticed that the game most definitely does not seem to like too many sounds at once. It kind of starts to cull noises once they get past a certain number that are happening at once, which is going to be very noticeable on minion-based builds and the like, where there are just a lot of things happening on screen at one time. And it does have a little bit of problem with that, and the sound starts to get a little bit wonky when there's a lot going on for a second. It will, of course, die down as soon as all the sound sources lower to a more acceptable level, but yeah, that's definitely something that's going to have to be fixed. And also the performance is mostly okay, but a little bit spotty here and there when there's a lot of particle effects going on. And also, with all the possible variety in builds, I can't help but want just 1 or 2 more skill slots. You know, just a few. It'd be really nice for the variety and everything. Please? So this is a game that has a really interesting prospect ahead of it, and I think I definitely want to see where it goes, because I very much love this genre, of course, and I like to take a look at them. And I think that the devs have shown, even since the alpha on their own forums, and now the beta on Steam and things like that, that they are very much listening to a lot of community feedback to help them, and they know what they're doing. So that does give me a bit of a certain bit of trust as to how the game shall develop from now until release, and it's slated for somewhere in like the April 2020 window for its release. Of course, that is also, you know, that kind of thing can change. But I think they'll make it, and I think it'll be a really fun time, and I am excited to see what all is going to be added and what's going to change and all that. I will say, in terms of other, I guess, complaints that I have right now, one of which is the areas are really large, and I like this normally. I like very sprawling, open areas to explore. However, in combination with the fact that areas reset as soon as you leave, like all of the map disappears and all of the enemies come back and everything, even if you just do something as a simple town portal to sell something and then come right back, that's annoying, because it makes me not want to stick around in the areas for too long or anything, or to explore like a quick optional side area as often, because I will have to do everything over when I come back, basically. Something like Path of Exile's instance system that allows you to completely reset an area and respawn the whole thing on command if you want to, but also will stay open and completed and cleared out to the degree that it was when you left for like 15 or so minutes, is really, really nice, and I think this game is definitely going to need something like that. So there are most definitely some things to hammer out, and it's, of course, going to be in early access for a while, so that's pretty reasonable, but I am excited to see what it will become, because it's already really enjoyable, and like I said, the whole time travel aspect of the world and the extremely interesting and customizable skill system has a great deal of promise to me, and I'm very excited to see what it actually becomes a little bit later once things are more complete and ironed out, and hopefully there's just, you know, a lot more content in general. I think it's going to be a really interesting game to follow. So this is Last Epoch, of course. The link will be in the description below, as always, to the Steam page. And one more little announcement. I'm actually going to be in Philadelphia for about a week or so, starting fairly soon, so if the channel is like a little quiet, it shouldn't be, but if it is, if something goes wrong, that is why. I'm actually going to go prepare another video to be released in between now and when I get back, and actually schedule it for upload, but you know, like I said, if something goes wrong because my internet has been really shoddy recently, that is why. So, thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.